I have a proposition. What if we could be the last generation of parents who feel afraid, confused, or unprepared when it comes to autism? Well, today's guest is on a mission to make that vision a reality. She's an autistic Black woman, a therapist, a parent advocate, and a powerful voice for understanding our kids. Not through fear or with rigid programs, but through empathy, insights, and behavioral understanding. If you ever wanted to feel more connected to your child, then this episode is here for you. Welcome to the Autism Family Resource Podcast, where we provide guidance and insights for parenting neurodivergent children. From Pure Hearts Therapy, I'm your host, Brian Keene. And today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Megan Ashley, a licensed therapist, speaker, author, and proud autism advocate. Her mission is to help parents better understand and connect with their autistic children, not with fear, but with behavioral wisdom and human compassion. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me, Brian.
It's a pleasure. All right, let's go ahead and get this conversation started by giving us a little insight of who you are and kind of your story growing up.
Okay. I did not recognize that I was autistic until I was well into my 30s. My kids had been diagnosed autistic. I had been working in autism spaces with autistic adults and children for years, was always fascinated by autism. And then at some point, I realized it's because I've been autistic this whole time. It was just a very interesting a roundabout way to come back to myself at some point. It's been very interesting to recognize the autism in myself that I had been helping other people recognize this whole time.
What sort of things did you notice when observing children, or what kind of put the connected the dots for you? What are some traits or things
Mhm.
you recognized?
So, especially with other children, I recognized that I understood their thought process. So it's so interesting, like the autistic thought process of getting from point A to point B. If a person who is not autistic or is neurotypical could have a conversation with one of us and they're like, I'm sorry, you lost me. Like, where did we get, how did we get from here to there? But I noticed that when I was talking to autistic people, children and adults, I never had to ask them to stop and tell me where they were coming from because I completely understood their train of thought. And so I would be able to follow it wherever it was going. And I noticed that with other autistic people, they were able to do the same with me. I never had to feel like I had to over explain myself. And so I think that's one of the ways in which we tend to understand each other.
Gotcha. So it's almost a little bit of a mutual connection and
Mhm.
understanding. Okay, they get me, and I get them.
Yep.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. So now that you're in this professional space doing what you do, tell me a little bit more about culture. How does that impact what you do? And I
Mhm.
know one of the things that we talked about in the past is you wanted this to be the last generation of autism misunderstanding. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to culture, you cannot have an autistic person without understanding their culture, not just the autism culture, but the culture in which they were raised, whether it's their ethnicity, family of origin, all of those things. Just the same way you can't divorce a person from their autism, you can't divorce a culture from a person either. So if you want to understand them, you need to look at them holistically, right? And so, with this being my goal for this to be the last generation of children born to autistic parents who don't know what to do. It would be having people understand what autism culture looks like what the behaviors, what the communication, the sensory sensitivities, all of those things, understanding that culture the same way you would understand things from a Black culture perspective, a Hispanic or Latino culture perspective, South Asian culture perspective, understanding the culture of autism so that you're not walking in unknowingly and you're able to approach autistic people with respect and with care and with curiosity about why is it that you do the things that you do and how can I help you in any way that you determine you need help.
Let me ask you this.
Mhm.
In your own words, or kind of from your perspective, how would you describe that autism culture maybe to a new parent who
Mm,
maybe just is not like, "Hey, I'm confused. My child was diagnosed. What do I do with this?"
yeah.
Or even a lot of times with parents, they don't know how to explain it to their other family members,
Mhm.
grandma or aunt who's, taking the reins and like watching the kid during the day. How
Yeah.
can we explain that culture so people get it better?
No, that's a great question. So I would be explaining it as like this is one person that you're meeting who is autistic. This is what other autistic people do. Let's get to know this particular person, like this child or this adult. Let's know what it is that makes them that are their triggers, what are their soothers, what are the things that make them have joy, what are the things that cause them pain. All of those things you'd want to know, like getting to know a person. So, for example, you see a lot of times autistic kids, if they hear something that is too loud or the noise is something they don't like, it's hands up over the ears first, right? And so with other children, neurotypical children, you may see like them turn their head and look, but with autistic kids, they automatically go hands up. Part of being autistic is that your sensory information, you take it in at a different intensity and duration. So it's going to be, it'll pierce you further and it'll stay longer. And so understanding that would mean that if grandma is keeping little Billy, she's not going to turn on the vacuum cleaner and not think about the fact that it's going to be super loud for him. Maybe she'll prime him first and say, "Hey, little Billy, grandma's got a vacuum. I understand you're here. Do you want to go ahead and put your hands up so that you won't feel harmed by this sound, or do you want to put these noise canceling headphones on?" Like understanding him and what he needs, because if grandma didn't understand, then she could turn on the vacuum cleaner. Little Billy would have an absolute meltdown, and then grandma wouldn't know what to do. She wouldn't understand that this is why. She wouldn't understand what she could have done differently, because ultimately it's up to us as adults to give our kids environments in which they can thrive instead of expecting them to thrive in all environments. And I think that that's part of like the autistic culture, understanding what people need. The same way people in Asian cultures a lot of the time take their shoes off at the front door. If I tell you, come in my house and keep your shoes on, then I may not be respecting like, their culture when it comes to how you do things. Same with autistic culture, looking at the why and then understanding and respecting.
What I really liked about what you said is, I think a lot of times, especially with the older generation, they a lot of times they get pushed back. And for example, with the vacuum, grandma, I'm a vacuum whenever I want, right? So it's not
Mhm.
so much telling them like, don't vacuum. It's
Mhm.
being aware of their needs, of just saying, hey, they're sensitive to this. How can we adapt, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's like, okay, how can we adapt the environment? How can we make things easier for them?
Absolutely. Yeah, I tell people all the time that autistic people need accommodations in order for us to live in this world because it wasn't built with us in mind. It was built with neurotypical people in mind because that would be the majority, right? So, in order for us to live in this world, we need accommodations. That same IEP plan that you might have had as a kid, you're going to need an individualized life plan as an adult and as anybody living out in this world because it's just not conducive to an autistic person. So then you have to make these bubbles for yourself, these autistic protective bubbles, so that you can have comfort everywhere you go. Because you don't need to grin and bear it. You don't need to power through. You need comfort and care, just like everybody else deserves comfort and care. So that would mean making toolkits for yourself, making accommodations for yourself, having that life IEP where you're, taking these accommodations everywhere you go.
Can you give me an example, maybe even from your own life, of kinda
Yeah.
some of those sensory experiences? 'Cause, I think maybe that could be confusing for people sometimes.
It can be, yeah. No, that makes total sense. So for like my own life, I live in Texas. It is hot as Satan's toenails, okay? It is hot with like extra T's, right? And as an autistic person myself, I cannot stand being hot. When I'm hot, I cannot think. I feel like I cannot breathe. It feels like I'm trying to walk through water. Like being hot, my brain gets foggy, like I can't concentrate. And I had to learn these things about myself, that it wasn't just that I was uncomfortable being hot, it was a sensory experience for me that caused me to be dysregulated. So now what I have to do to make sure that in my autistic bubble that I am wherever I am and it's not hotter than absolute Hades, then I have neck fans, I have hand fans, I have cooling, like ice packs and things I can take with me when I go places. And this isn't just like out and about. This is in my house because I live with my husband and kids, and everybody has a different like feeling of what's hot and what's cold. So I may be burning up and they may be freezing, but it's up to me to make sure that I'm comfortable. And so therefore I have all of these different tools and things that I have for myself to make sure that I'm not suffering through the day. Because if I had to suffer through being hot every single day, I'd be exhausted by noon from the masking that I'd have to be doing in order for me to exist. And I don't want to do that.
Love that example. And I also recognize that you brought up the word masking, and that might be a
Mhm.
newer term for everybody. And I
Mhm.
think that's an important term. I think to extent a lot of people probably do mask, right? Talk more
Yep.
about masking, what that looks like, and maybe why that could be problematic, right? Because
Mhm.
on one perspective, you might be like, old school is just like be tough, push it
Yeah.
out, right? So
Mhm.
tell me more about that.
Okay. So I know sometimes in autistic spaces, people think that once you recognize you're autistic, you need to unmask, like you need to be your full self all the time. I don't fully agree with that. I think that in this world in 2025, we have to keep our safety paramount. And it may not always be safe to unmask in front of everybody all the time. It may not be safe for me to be my full self because that could cause me to be open up to like persecution. It could be caused for other people to attack me in whatever reason in whatever way they see necessary for somebody who's different, which they shouldn't. But again, let's be honest, this is where we're at, right? So when it comes to masking, what that can look like as an adult is trying to mirror what other people in other conversations are doing, like at a event or a networking thing. If you see people laughing, you laugh too. You don't know what's funny, but you laugh too because that means that you be doing what they're doing. You're going to appear as neurotypical as possible so that people won't find you out that you're autistic, right? And it doesn't mean that you're not proud of being autistic. It does not mean that you don't love yourself. It means that in this situation, it would be easier for you to put on a mask and appear as someone else than appear as your full autistic self. And I don't want people to feel shame in masking because it's definitely something that especially people in marginalized communities, like we call it code switching. It's the same kind of thing. I might have a different voice for work than I have with my friends on the phone. I may appear differently with my church than I appear with my mom, but it is all forms of masking. All masks are not bad. When it comes to autism, though, a lot of times masking is exhausting because you are constantly trying to show up as someone else, like this thing doesn't bother you, or this thing doesn't trigger you, or you're trying to walk through life like someone who you're not. And that just takes an emotional toll. And a lot of times you see kids who mask all day at school where they have to sit still when that is not their nature and they don't feel comfortable doing that. They have to face forward, they have to give eye contact. All of these things are against what this autistic person's body is telling them to do. So they have to be very rigid and be very neurotypical facing at school most of the time. And so when you see your kids get home and pass out, like they're exhausted, they're tired, they got to take a nap even before they get home. They're asleep in the car on the way home. It's because they've exhausted their little bodies all day being somebody who they think other people want them to be.
Yeah, definitely. So interesting. I like the way you kind of explained it, and I really love your perspective on that.
Thank you.
As far as masking goes, we know kind of from research that women tend to be diagnosed later on with autism a lot of
Mhm.
times because they are better at masking.
Mhm.
Can you give me your perspective on that?
Yeah, that is a multi-layer question because there's a reason why women are better at masking. And it's not just that we're like inherently better, like that's just not something we're born with. We're better at masking because in our patriarchal society, we have to. You're supposed to smile and be pretty. You're supposed to be seen, not heard. Even now in 2025, where we've had a woman vice president and things like that, we've seen how it's still very prevalent that women are seen a lot of times as a second class citizen. And because of that, like you're supposed to defer to the majority or defer to the person who's in charge, which a lot of times are men, and men then get that ability to show up how they want to show up without having to mask quite as much. So I think that a lot of the reason why women are not diagnosed when they're younger is because as girls, we're not encouraged to be loud. We're not encouraged to be our full selves. We're encouraged and we're taught and we're socialized to be smaller and quieter and more unobtrusive and not to upset other people. And even though our parents are probably doing it unknowingly, that is what society tells them to do. Now that does not mean that boys are, could just do whatever and that's okay, but it's saying that a boy with behaviors of autism will be seen before a girl with behaviors of autism because a lot of those autistic behaviors in girls look like socially acceptable behaviors. So if you're super organized, you have all the lists, right? Like that's not something that's bothering anybody, so nobody's going to notice it's a problem. But you may be internally freaking out as a little girl because you have I'll give you an example of lists. Do you remember back when you could have like ringtones on your phone and you could have
Yep.
different
Yep.
ones? So I would have lists. I would change my ringtones quarterly, right? This is me in high school. I'm changing my ringtones quarterly. I had it on a schedule. I would write down the different songs that I thought I liked at that point in time, like popular songs that I liked. And then I would write down all of the people who needed a ringtone. So my mom needed one, my dad, my brother, my boyfriend, my best friend. I had like 6 or 7 people who needed a special ringtone. And then I would assign those and I would change them all at once so that I would know that all of the ringtones change at once. Is that a normal thing for people to do? No. I had all of these lists who were super organized with changing my ringtones quarterly, and I did not realize how autistic that was because it wasn't bothering anybody. It was just me, right? And so because a lot of the traits that women have, like the organization, or they want us to, sit still, smile, and be pretty, like a lot of those are in line with how autism shows up in girls. And so it does not show up on a test until it bothers us enough to where we can't hold the mask up anymore. And that's when they end up in my office because that is my specialty, is working with high masking individuals, and especially women and people of color who are autistic, who are most often misdiagnosed. And that's my specialty when it comes to therapy.
Gotcha. That's really intriguing. Definitely.
Mhm.
Thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah.
Going with this, I'm thinking about, I mean, we talked about your life, talked about adulthood and kind of how that presents.
Mhm.
Let's go backwards a little bit now. So maybe for the parents who have a child, what are some tips and techniques, one, to maybe like recognize if their child may be autistic or neurodivergent, and maybe what we can do? What are some of the things that we can start implementing?
Yeah. So I thank you for that question. For children, you can look at all the literature on what an autistic kid looks like, but I think the most important pieces for you to understand is sensory is king. I tell people that all the time. Sensory is king. You need to treat it as such. If you notice that your child is having a different sensory experience than other people, that can be one of the main indicators of autism. If you notice that if your kid is in a classroom and everybody's singing and your kid has their hands up over their ears because it feels too loud for them, they're not being a princess. They're not being dramatic. They're not being overly whatever you want to call them. They are more sensitive to that noise, so it sounds different for them. Or they may be more sensitive to touch if you notice that they don't like to be hugged or touched by other people, or they need constant hug and touch and they need constant pressure. Anything that feels different from what a child their age would normally experience sensory wise. Lights, even if you notice that what we call in our house the big light, if you turn on the big light in the living room and everybody like cowers, then it's like, oh, okay, we got some light sensitivity going on. In our house, we have a lot of lamps. Just like in most autistic houses, you'll have a lot of lamps and things like that. You'll have a lot of low lighting because fluorescent lights in particular are very bothersome for autistic people. So if you notice that your child is having a different sensory experience than their peers, then that may be a big indicator that they probably have an autistic nervous system and that they're just interpreting sensory information different. If they have very specific likes and dislikes when it comes to textures of clothing, of foods, and things like that, it's not that they're being dramatic again, it's that they feel it completely differently than somebody else would. I know for me, tomatoes are a no. Like, please don't. Like the squishy part of the tomato, it makes my skin crawl to think of it. Okra, ooh, the slimy, I can't do it. Like, even when my kids would bring home slime to play with, they're like, Mom, play slime with me. Absolutely not. I will watch you play it, but I'm not playing slime. Chalk, like chalk for the chalkboard. my entire life, if I had to write on a chalkboard, I would have to go and wash my hands immediately. Not hand sanitizer, not wet wipes. I need to scrub my fingers because the feeling of chalk on my fingers feels like, well, nails on a chalkboard. Like it feels terrible to me. It makes me actually physically nauseous. And so all of these experiences your child may be experiencing, you can see it as early as them being infants sometimes. When you notice that a baby is colicky, my theory a lot of the times is that that baby is experiencing the world differently. That discomfort of milk being in the back of their throat is not just discomfort for them, it's painful and they don't like it. And so a lot of times it's just looking at the world, your child's world differently.
Mm. Those are a lot of great insights there of things to check out. I love that you just honed in on like just the sensory thing, right?
Mhm.
Because we all feel and do see things and differently, right? So
Yeah.
thanks for sharing that. For your family, you have kids and they are autistic. Are there some things that you kind of
Mhm.
honed in and recognized on? And second, did you know right away that your kids are autistic? What did that
Mhm.
process look like for you?
For my oldest, I knew immediately that he was autistic. He was just different. He's 11 now. My youngest is 9 now. But for him, it was toe walking. That was one of the first indicators. Like, I cannot tell you how many times I've ever seen him put his heels down on the ground. He was always a toe walker. I'm a toe walker too. So I noticed that right away. Even though he was diagnosed before I was, I knew that that was an autistic trait. And so for that, and then like the way that he thinks is so different. I'll give you an example, like, on medicine bottles where you are supposed to be childproof, right? And it says on the top, like, push down, turn left. That's how you open it. And I told him when he was like 8 or 9 to hand me some medicine, and he handed it to me open. I said, "Oh no, you're not supposed to open it. It's childproof." And he said, "Well, if it was childproof, why did they write the directions on the top?" I said, "You know what? You are so right." Because he was just like, it has an arrow and it has the push down. Like, I don't have to know how to read in order to open this medicine. And yeah, he makes total sense when it comes to different things. He told me that raccoons are the ninjas of the forest. And I was like, you know what? You are so right. He just thinks so differently when it comes to different things. And he makes me think deeper about different things too. It's just the way his brain works is not the way a neurotypical child's would. And there's nothing wrong with being a neurotypical child. It's just that my little autistic muffin, he's just so beautifully different. So I knew with his thought process and his physical stuff, he needed a lot of pressure all the time. He was always jumping off of something, jumping onto something. He would do like these super duper Spider-Man jumps and rolls on the couch in the living room, about to give me a heart attack half the time. But yeah, he always needed some sensory stimulation. And so those were some of the clues with him.
I love the example. That's hilarious. Just some of the things are
Mhm.
just so literal sometimes.
Yeah.
Can you tell me well, Imma tell you, like, one of my beliefs is, like, I think all traits could be a positive or negative depending on how they're,
Mhm.
used, so even for myself, like, sometimes, I'm a big picture thinker, in some settings that really is great, right, for big
Mhm.
ideas, right, but sometimes I miss the details, right, so, most traits have a positive and negative. So maybe could you talk about more like that with autistic traits? Sometimes
Mhm.
we hear the diagnosis of autism and we think, "Oh, everything's bad," but maybe there we can highlight some of the gifts in that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of it less of like traits being positive and negative, and I think about environments in which a trait is positive for somebody. So, like I said, the we are disabled in the neurotypical world because the world is disabling to us. If we're in our autistic bubble where we've made everything comfortable for ourselves, like all of the sensory stuff is taken care of, all of our communication needs are taken care of, all of those things are taken care of, it's really easy to convince yourself that, well, am I like autistic? What's going on? I'm not feeling disabled. It's because you're in an environment that was built for you. So when we're talking about a positive or a negative, me being an outspoken person, me being very literal, me being very detail oriented, it works for my job. I am fantastic at my job. Like, that's not me tooting my own horn. That's just a fact. I am really good at what I do, and my autism traits help me be good at what I do. But does that make it difficult for me in friendships sometimes? Yes. Because if you ask me, like, does this dress look terrible on me? I'm gonna be like, well, yeah, probably it does. That's not your color. And that cut just does not look great on you. How about we try something else? And that could get me in trouble because it does not fit other social norms. But when it's with my friends who know me, care for me, and are probably autistic too, if we're gonna be honest, then it's going to fit in those situations. So whether it's a positive or negative, I think it really depends on who you're around, where you are, what is going on, all of those things. And so what I tell clients all the time is find the spaces that make sense for you and stay there. You don't have to go and do everything. There are certain things that just won't be good for your autistic self, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. Figure out whatever you want and need and do that thing, and your traits will shine in those areas.
That makes me get onto the topic of our education system and
Mm.
optimizing it for all kids, but I think that might be a conversation for another time. But, let's go ahead and kinda start wrapping things up. If you can go back and give one message to your younger self
Mm.
or to the parent of your child, what would it be?
They're gonna be okay. The kids are gonna be okay. And I say that because, when my second child was diagnosed autistic, his signs and symptoms were not as obvious to me because my oldest son was more like me. Like, I saw myself in him. My younger son, was definitely different. His autism looked different to me, and it scared me because I didn't know if he was going to be okay. I knew that I was fine in my mind, and so my older son was gonna be alright, but my younger son, who would have been considered nonverbal, for a while. Now he's semi-verbal. Like, that was so different for me. I was hyperverbal, and my oldest is hyperverbal too. I did not know if my youngest son was gonna be okay. But, what my husband said at the time when we got his diagnosis really stuck out to me. He said, "You just have to redefine what okay means." If you're looking at him and he is happy, and he is healthy, and he is joyful, and he has all the things that he needs, then your version of okay and his version of okay are 2 different things, and who are you to tell him what his is? Like, that's not right. And so we need to define okay by his standards. And he is so happy. He's one of the most joyful people I have ever met in my life. And he's able to tell you what he wants and what he needs. He uses his communication to do so. We had to learn how to speak his language instead of forcing him to speak ours. And so it was just a big lesson. And that is when I started writing the book about parenting, is when I realized, like, there are other parents who may be going through some of the same things too, and you just need to know how to hear your kid. You need to know how to listen, because if you never learn how to listen to your specific child, you're going to be looking for things that aren't there and you're going to be disappointed. You're going to be reaching for things that aren't attainable and you're going to be disappointed when you really just need to shift what okay means. It's not that they won't be okay, you just need to shift what okay means. And that's a lot of what I talk about in the book is, getting to know your kid on such a deep level that's what's understood doesn't have to be explained. And I think that is one of the advantages of being a parent of an autistic kid versus a parent of a neurotypical kid, is that you get to learn them so much deeper because you have to. And that also ends up being a bonus, a plus for us. Like, I get to know all of these things about my child. If my child was neurotypical, I might not need to know all of those things in order to make them happy because they'd be able to express it in the language that I speak. But with my autistic child, I have to get to know them on so much deeper level because it may not always be verbal. It may not always be in English, you know? And so
Mhm.
I find that to be a strength of ours as an autistic family.
Mm. That's really powerful. I love what he said, redefine what what okay is. That's huge. And, I can't let you leave without giving me one tip for the parents on how to listen, because I know that's your wheelhouse.
Mhm.
What's one tip that a parent could take on how to listen better to their child and really understand their child better?
I think observing in a way that you are taking away your own bias. And I see this a lot of times with parents. I was just talking to a parent about it earlier. She was saying that when it's time for them to leave the house, her daughter will get fixated on her shoes and how they have to be right, like how they have to fit exactly right. The sock seam has to be exactly where it needs to be. And mom gets upset. She's just like, "You're making us late. We have to be here. Like, you're taking so long. Why do you keep making us late?" And I had to help her reframe that your daughter's not trying to make you late. She's trying to get her sock fixed. You being late is a product of that, but that's not her intention. And a lot of times with children, we forget that they're not miniature adults, they are children. And so therefore they're not malicious in intent. They're not trying to make you late by getting their shoe done the way they want it to. They're just trying to get their shoe fixed the way they want it to. The late part is your problem, not theirs. And so a lot of times as parents, we put those feelings onto our kids like you're being mean. Well, no, they were just telling you how they felt. Or you're fighting your sleep and it's making me not be able to sleep. No, they're fighting their sleep because they're fighting their sleep. They're not being resistant, they're showing resistance. And it's up to us to help them through that instead of internalizing it and acting like our child is the opposition. Your child is not. Your child is just trying to survive. They've only been on this earth for a few years. Like, y'all, come on now. They're not out here trying to take us all down, Like that's not what's happening. And a lot of parents treat it that way because they're so used to other adults treating them that way that they don't know how to hear what their kids are saying. So one thing I would tell parents is try and take your bias out of it and look at what they're actually doing. Is she making you late or is she trying to fix her sock? And if she's trying to fix her sock and you want to get out of the house, the best thing you could do is help her fix the sock. And then we've solved the problem because now you're listening to what she's saying through her behavior. You're listening to that communication instead of only hearing it from your end. Put yourself in their shoes, which I know is harder, is easier said than done. A lot of times it can be very hard to be fully empathetic to someone else. But for you to be a good parent to an autistic person, a good partner to an autistic person, a good autistic person yourself, like listening to yourself, what am I actually trying to do and do that instead of what bias do I have against that behavior?
I love those. I love those. Well, thank you for sharing your story. I think you gave us a lot of good insight and some tips. Some of the big things I think that stood out is just really that emphasis on sensory that you mentioned, right? Just
Mhm.
if you see those sensory differences, that's a very, very tall tale sign.
Yeah.
And then I also love that you pointed on environment, right? A lot of times, whether or not we thrive or not, it has a lot to do with the environment and
Yeah.
getting our child in an environment where they thrive, right? Whether it's a school, whether it's home, whether it's wearing headphones, right? It's not about changing the
Mhm.
person, right? Giving those environment that's helped support them. And we're obviously, I'm sure, teaching them, those advocacy needs, right? And then I
Yeah.
think the last thing that just really hit home is redefining what okay means and taking your bias out of it, right? When we're understanding our
Mhm.
child. And I think that is huge. So those are really great.
Thank you.
All right, Megan. Thanks again. If anybody wants to connect with you and learn more from you, whether it's counseling or just anything like that, how do they reach out to you and tell us more about that?
Yeah, you can find me at the letter M, Perfect Consulting. So imperfectandconsulting.com. You can also find me on Instagram at imperfect consulting. You can go on Amazon or anywhere where you can buy books online, barnesandnoble.com, walmart.com, target.com, and you can get my book called Blueprint to Behavior, Understanding Autism in Your Family Through Understanding Behaviors. And it's fantastic. Like I talk about all of the things we talked about today, how to actually take that bias out of the experience and really hear your kid. There are worksheets at the end of the book. So at the end, you end up having this notebook that is full of information about your child that you can hand to whoever is watching your child for them to understand them fully. And so it's a great help for that. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you all. Reach out, please.
Awesome. Thank you so much for showing up on the show today. It was a pleasure and sharing all your insights.
Thank you. Thank you.
The resources in this show are designed to empower your family to thrive. I believe in the power of community for growing and learning, so let's stay connected. Follow Pure Hearts Therapy on social media. Links are in the show notes below, or visit pureheartstherapy.com for more tools, resources, and support. Thanks for tuning in to the Autism Family Resource Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review to help more families find this resource. Until next time, take care and see you soon.